Before 2010, the U.S. healthcare system left nearly 50 million Americans entirely without coverage, and insurers routinely denied applications from people who had pre-existing conditions, ranging from asthma to cancer. If a policyholder did manage to get a plan and then got sick, companies could scour their original paperwork for minor errors to drop their coverage exactly when they needed it most. Presidents from Harry Truman to Bill Clinton had tried to restructure this market. Every single attempt ended in defeat, earning healthcare reform a reputation as a legislative trap that routinely derailed political careers. Then came the 2008 presidential election. Barack Obama made expanding coverage a primary pillar of his campaign, turning the issue into an unavoidable domestic mandate for the incoming administration. The task required rewriting the rules for roughly 1/5 of the entire United States economy. With premiums growing 3 times faster than wages and the uninsured rate climbing year after year, the math had simply run out. The government was forced into a high-stakes gamble because leaving the system alone was no longer a viable option. In 2009, the legislation faced a hostile path through Congress. Democrats held majorities in both chambers, but they were fragile, relying on conservative members from red states skeptical of government expansion. To get the package through the Senate without hitting a Republican roadblock, Democrats utilized a process called reconciliation. This is a budgetary loophole that allows certain tax and spending bills to pass with a simple 51-vote majority, entirely bypassing the usual 60-vote threshold needed to break a filibuster. Even with the Senate navigated, the bill nearly died in the House. A pivotal bloc of pro-life Democrats, led by Representative Bart Stupak, threatened to sink the entire law over concerns that federal subsidies might be used to fund abortions. To save the legislation at the 11th hour, the White House issued Executive Order 13535. This directive explicitly reaffirmed existing bans on using federal funds for abortion services, securing Stupak's bloc. The House finally passed the bill with 0 Republican support. It was a battered, strictly partisan victory that immediately guaranteed a fierce, highly organized, and relentless political backlash. The Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, or ACA, left the employer-based insurance system largely intact. Instead, it radically rewired the individual market, where people buy their own coverage. The law injected massive consumer protections. It banned those pre-existing condition denials outright, eliminated lifetime coverage limits, and allowed young adults to remain on their parents' insurance plans until they turned 26. This diagram illustrates the core economic challenge those protections created. If insurers are forced to accept everyone, you risk adverse selection. That is an economic scenario where mostly sick, expensive patients buy coverage, while healthy people opt out, tipping the risk pool out of balance and causing premiums to skyrocket. To prevent that collapse, the law included the individual mandate. It required Americans to either purchase health insurance or pay a tax penalty, financially forcing younger, healthier individuals into the pool to subsidize the costs of covering the sick. To make that mandatory insurance affordable, the government set up digital health exchanges, online marketplaces where individuals could shop for private plans. For households earning between 100% and 400% of the federal poverty level, the law provided sliding-scale tax subsidies to help pay the premiums. For those earning under 133% of the poverty line, the law broadened the federal safety net by expanding Medicaid eligibility to cover all adults, including those without dependent children. The architecture of the law relied on a delicately balanced economic equation. The popular consumer protections relied entirely on the unpopular taxes and mandates. Pull out one gear, and the entire machine was designed to stall. This chart tracks the U.S. uninsured rate, showing a steep plunge starting in 2014 when the major provisions took effect. By 2016, the uninsured share of the population had roughly halved. That drop translates to between 20 and 24 million Americans gaining coverage. At the same time, the aggressive growth of overall healthcare spending, including premiums for employer-based plans, began to slow down. But a major complication arrived in 2012 with NFIB v. Sebelius. This was a landmark Supreme Court case challenging the constitutionality of the individual mandate and the Medicaid expansion. The court upheld the core of the law, creatively recharacterizing the mandate penalty as a tax. Crucially, however, they ruled that the federal government could not force states to participate in the Medicaid expansion. Looking at this map, we see a stark geographical divide. Dozens of Republican-controlled states opted out of the expansion, creating a severe coverage gap. Millions of low-income adults in these states earned too much for traditional Medicaid, but too little to qualify for the new marketplace subsidies. By making expansion optional, the Supreme Court decision created two distinct and unequal healthcare realities in America, dictated entirely by geography and state lines. The law faced relentless resistance. Congress voted dozens of times to repeal or modify it. Citizens marched in opposition, and the disastrous 2013 launch of healthcare.gov gave critics ample ammunition. Yet, beneath the political warfare, millions of citizens integrated the system into their lives, consulting with marketplace workers and securing their financial futures. The individual mandate penalty was eventually reduced to zero in 2017, but the exchanges, the consumer protections, and the Medicaid expansions in participating states stabilized and endured. The Affordable Care Act overhauled a fractured market and halved the uninsured rate. By sustaining those gains through a decade of legal and political sieges, it permanently shifted the American political baseline, making the expectation of coverage a right rather than a privilege.